All right, welcome to the review of question 1 on the AAMC Preview Practice Test. And yeah, let's jump right into it. But before we do, make sure if you haven't seen the first video in this series, in this playlist where we go through our process for and methodology for answering the questions on this exam, please go watch that first, as we'll explain a bit more about the two-step elimination process we're going to use to really answer these questions. So go watch that video first and then watch this video next. And just as kind of a primer, if you haven't done the exam yet, I would or at least question 1, I would highly recommend doing that before watching this video, as doing the question and really taking some time to reflect on your thought process and why you answered the way you did before watching this video, and then watching it in order to understand what you did right and maybe where you can improve. And doing that process, in my opinion, is the best way to get the most out of this practice test. So answer the question first and then watch this video and then kind of compare your thought processes between the two. And before we jump into it, also just to let you know, we have this scale, and if you haven't been familiarized with this scale yet, definitely go watch that first video before watching this, and we kind of go through it a bit more. But this is, our holy grail for answering the question on this exam, so we'll be referencing it a lot. And alongside that, we have this flow chart where we're going to kind of go through our thought processes and explicitly write out what questions we use in order to answer questions. And as we go through each of these 30 questions on this exam, we'll fill this out more and more. And then, yeah, so that's kind of all I had to say before we jump into it. So let's start with question 1. All right, scenario 1. And remember, step 1, we got to read the question, right? Critically read the question. So scenario 1, you are pursuing a 2-week volunteer opportunity at a well-regarded local clinic. When you receive your course schedule, you realize the volunteer opportunity would conflict with your required lab. Okay, this is the only time the lab is offered this semester, so you are not able to make up the lab. Participation in the lab will count towards your grade. Please rate the effectiveness. Okay, so, let's first critically read the question, right? And when I'm reading this question, one of the first things I'm thinking of and kind of realizing is that our volunteer opportunity is indeed a volunteer opportunity, right? It's something, we're not committed to it yet, right? And it's still a volunteer opportunity. But our lab, right? Our lab is required by our school. So, and they even put these 2 sentences here at the end that we can't make up the lab, and our participation will count towards our grade. So that kind of just reinforces, that this lab is really required, right? And we should not compromise on attending it. So that's kind of what I'm thinking as I'm going through and reading the question, right? And then, okay, so we did that. Step 2, summarize the central idea, central problem here. And the central problem here, in my estimation, is that, there's a conflict between our required lab and our volunteer clinic, right? Pretty straightforward. And there's this conflict, right? And we don't really know what to do about it. So let's remove this out your way. And that's the central problem that we've been tasked with in this scenario, right? Okay, so let's jump into the first response. And, we have the main problem here, just so we never lose sight of it, right? And the first response that we're given, let me just get these out of the way too, is that skip your lab for 2 weeks to attend a volunteer opportunity. Okay, so where do we go now, right? Remember, our first step, or I guess our third step really, is to narrow down our choices into 2 possible answers, right? Narrow down our choices into 2 possible answers. So when we read the skip our lab for 2 weeks to attend the volunteer opportunity, one question we could use to narrow this down is, are you fulfilling your responsibilities? And what kind of, and yeah, so where do you derive this question from, right? Well, you derive this question, and this is just one question, and as we go through the exam, we'll kind of add on to this, right? But we derive this question from the scale because we know effective 3s and 4s will help the situation, but 1s and 2s won't help the situation, right? And if we're not fulfilling our responsibility, which is another way of, are we addressing the main problem? It's kind of the same question, but a bit of a different view on it. Then if we aren't doing that, then we're not going to be improving the situation, right? So it's a good question to ask, and just to kind of have in your back pocket to decide, are we in the, to narrow down our choices, right? So our responsibility told to us pretty clearly is that we have a weekly required lab, right? And then this response says skip your lab for 2 weeks. Okay, so, this is not going to be, that's a little big. This is not going to be an effective or very ineffective response, right? And that is because we are not fulfilling our responsibility. Okay, so now that we've come to that, let's decide. Let me make these a little bit smaller, actually. Let's decide, is this a very ineffective or ineffective response, right? And so, how do we differentiate between the two? Well, we know from the scale that a very ineffective response will cause additional problems or make the situation worse. An ineffective response will not improve the situation, or it might cause a problem, right? So from that, let's go back, right? And let's ask these 2 questions right here. Let's ask 2 more questions, right? To what extent are we recognizing there's an issue, offering a solution, or relinquishing your responsibilities, right? Also, are there any overt consequences to this response? Okay, now these are 2 questions, and don't worry, we'll have a whole list of them after we go through this exam, but these are 2 questions to kind of further clarify what it means to cause a problem, right? So let's look at this. Are we recognizing there's an issue? Are we relinquishing our responsibilities? And are there any overt consequences to our response? It told us pretty clearly that we can't make up the lab and it counts towards our grade, right? And we're skipping our lab. So there's probably going to be some overt consequences here. Furthermore, we're giving up on our responsibility to attend the required lab. So this one's going to be very effective. Okay, sorry, very ineffective. And yeah, that's kind of the thought process to work through each of these questions. Now, let's go to the next one. Let's go back. All right, 1.2. Let's jump into it. Response: ask your lab instructor to identify a solution that will allow you to attend both. Okay, that's, a little bit better than the previous one, right? At least now we're trying to identify a solution. Okay. Let's look back on this. A very ineffective response will cause additional problems or make the situation worse. We can kind of tell this isn't going to be a very ineffective response, right? We can kind of tell that because, we're asking our lab instructor to identify a solution, and that's probably not a very ineffective response, right? Because on our last problem, we saw, skipping your lab, and, that's very ineffective. This one, a little bit better, right? So not going to be very ineffective. Now, is this a very effective response? And I'm going to throw it out there that this is not going to be a very effective response. Now, how do I know that? Well, because this is a bit tricky, right? And we'll get better at this, and we'll build the skill and intuition more as we go through the exam. But in this question, the way it's worded is that we're not the one to identify the solution, right? We're asking our lab instructor to identify a solution for us. And that is something the AAMC does not like. The AAMC wants you to take responsibility of the problem, particularly because this is our problem, right? We have this conflict between our 2 responsibilities of the lab and our, wanting to go to the clinic. So asking the instructor to identify a solution is not us identifying a solution. And for that reason, because we're not taking responsibility of that, this is not going to be a very effective response. So we're left with an ineffective or an effective response. So how do we differentiate between the two? Well, let's posit another question, now this time in the ineffective, effective column. Are we taking responsibility for solving the problem? Right? Are we taking responsibility for solving the problem? Now, where did I get that from? As we go along, we're definitely gonna, build this intuition, like I've been saying, but primarily it comes from this scale, right? And trust me, this is our guiding light to this exam, right? Because this is the only concrete evidence we've been given by the AAMC as to, what constitutes each level, each level on this scale, on this 4-point scale. And an ineffective response will not improve the situation or make out the problem. An effective response could help, but will not significantly improve the situation. So from that, right, we derive this question of, are you taking responsibility for solving the problem? Because if you are taking responsibility for solving the problem, that is seen as a way of improving the situation. And you're the one that's taking action towards solving it, right? The AAMC does not want you to pawn off your problems to other people. So for this reason, as we are asking your instructor to identify a solution, this will not be an effective response. It will actually be an ineffective response. All right, so let's go back. Number 3, let's get these out of the way. Yeah, that one's a bit tricky. I think 1.2, probably one of the most tricky questions on the exam, in my opinion. But that's the kind of thinking that the AAMC wants you to get used to as you're going through the exam. So, all right, let's move on. Number 3, stop pursuing the volunteer opportunity so you can attend the required lab. Okay. So let's go back. Let's go back to, the first question we're going to ask to make our initial differentiation. Are you fulfilling your responsibilities? For this one, yeah, you are. You're stopping your volunteer opportunity and you're attending the required lab. So, oh my God. So for this one, I'm gonna go to either it's a 3 or 4 because we are fulfilling our responsibility. All right. So how do we differentiate between an effective and a very effective response? All right. I'm gonna throw another question we can ask up here. I did spell effective wrong. Just fix that. Are we finding an effective compromise? And this one should be a bit more straightforward as to why this can differentiate an effective or very effective response. And maybe let's take effective out of here because that might be a bit redundant, right? Are we finding a compromise to the problem is a question we can ask. And why can that differentiate between a 3 and a 4? Well, it's because we know a 3 could help but may not significantly improve the situation, while a 4 will improve the situation. And the problem we're faced here, right, is a conflict between the required lab and our volunteer opportunity. If we find a good compromise, that will significantly improve the situation. If we don't, but we still attend the required lab, hey, it could help. We're not hurting our grade, but we won't be addressing the main conflict here, right? So for this question, stop pursuing the volunteer opportunity so you can attend the required lab. In my mind, that's not a very good compromise, right? Even though you're fulfilling your responsibility of attending the required lab, you're not doing enough to kind of also address your desire to attend the volunteer opportunity. So that's not an effective compromise. That's going to be a 3. All right, it's going to be an effective answer. All right. We're more than halfway done now. Let's go. All right, so that's a 3, right? That's an effective answer. Now let's go back. All right, let's go back. Now let's go up to 4, 1.4. tell your lab instructor in advance that you will miss 2 of your scheduled lab sessions. Okay, so this is, a bit reminiscent of the first question where we're missing our lab, we're missing the required lab, but it's a little bit of an improvement, right? We're telling our lab instructor that we're going to miss 2 of our scheduled lab sessions, so we're giving some heads up, but, these questions and these responses should not be defined relative to each other, right? Each question is its own scenario. And, that's one reason why I kind of made this presentation in this way, where between every question, we're going back to the main problem, the main scenario, and we're tackling these each individually, right? We're going back, coming into each of these questions individually, right? So let's treat this, let's be fair, let's treat it like any other question. Are we fulfilling our responsibilities, right? That's how we make this the first differentiation. Are we fulfilling our responsibilities? At least, that's how we're going to do it for this question. We're going to find some more questions to ask later on. For this one, yeah, we're not doing that, right? We're missing both of our lab sessions. For that reason, we can make sure make sure we cancel out a 3 and a 4 because we're not fulfilling our responsibility here to attend our required lab. So how do we differentiate between a 3 and 4? Well, let's go back to how we did it before, right? To what extent are we recognizing there's an issue, offering a solution, are we relinquishing our responsibilities? Are there going to be overt consequences to our response? For this one, yeah, we're definitely just relinquishing our responsibility. We're not really identifying if, and trying to improve on the problem of this conflict. And yeah, there's still going to be consequences, even though, we are notifying our lab instructor. We can't make up the grade. So yeah, this is definitely going to be a 1 also. Right, I'm gonna just make sure that's this is the 1. Okay. Now that's number 4. We have 1 question left. All right, we have 1 question left. 1.5. All right. All right, 1.5. Attend the lab and investigate if similar volunteer opportunities are available at another time. Okay, so we are attending the lab, and remember, this is how we're differentiating, this is how we're narrowing down our first choice, narrowing down our kind of first elimination process is to ask, are we fulfilling our responsibilities? And yeah, we are. This time we are, because we're attending the lab, which is required. So, I keep doing this. I gotta remember to, all right. We are doing this, so we can knock out a 1 and 2, and we're gonna focus on whether this is an effective or a very effective response, right? So how do we do that? Well, let's see what we asked last time. Are you finding, I'm gonna ask both. All right. Are we finding a compromise for the problem? All right, are we finding a compromise here? Attend the lab and investigate if similar volunteer opportunities are available at another time. Yeah, that's a pretty good compromise, right? We're like, hey, we have this conflict in front of us. We can't do both, unfortunately, but, hopefully let's attend the lab and try to see if we can find another volunteer opportunity that we can go to, so we can fulfill both of these desires. And so for me, that is an effective response, right? That is a very effective response, right? We're finding a good compromise that will allow us to hopefully, at least take a step and take a step towards achieving both, and addressing the conflict between the two. All right. So there we go. There we have it. That is number 1. That is question 1 down. If you like the video, comment and like and subscribe. If you have any suggestions for me how I can improve, definitely comment that down below, and I will see you for question 2.